Episode 1. The water was not holy. They said the church had been cleansed, that the well beneath the towns sealed by ash and crosses was finally sanctified. But when Clara kneeled in her white gown, water streaming over her forehead, the first thing she heard wasn't the priest's blessing. It was screaming, not human, not beast, something older, something wounded. The voice clawed up through the blessed water, dragging a name that no soul had spoken in centuries, and it said it inside her skull. You are mine now. I was there that day. I remember how the light flickered above the altar as the water touched her, how Clara's body stiffened like stone, how her eyes wide, ancient sudden lie locked on something none of us could see, and for a moment, the incense in the air turned to rot. The bishop said it was nerves, that the girl had merely fainted, that the stain on the water basin, a black smear that crawled against the porcelain, was nothing more than old mildew. But I saw Clara that night. I followed her. She didn't go home. She walked barefoot through the village, the hem of her gown soaked and dragging, like something was pulling it from underground. She didn't cry, didn't shiver. She was listening to something under the earth. She stopped in front of the abandoned chapel. No priest would enter since the fire. The door opened before she touched it. Inside, every candle lit itself. The crucifix on the wall bled at the eyes. And Clara, she whispered something in a voice that wasn't hers. A voice deeper, broken, familiar only to those who once believed in things they shouldn't. I couldn't move. My limbs locked with terror. But my ears, God help me, heard it too. The baptism was not for heaven. It was a summoning. That night, the village dogs wouldn't bark. The bell tower rang once, though no one had touched it, and Clara stood beneath the old stained glass angel, staring up at it as if daring it to descend. But it didn't. Nothing did. Only silence, and a smell like burning feathers and iron. Clara turned slowly toward me then, not surprised, not afraid. Her eyes were glowing faintly, as if lit from within, and when she spoke, her mouth didn't move. He remembers your name too. I ran, and I never prayed again. Episode 2. The confession that melted the crucifix. No one had seen Clara for 3 days, but on the 4th, the church bell rang again 5 times, just before dawn. And when the priest opened the confessional that morning, he found her already inside. Her hands were folded, her eyes were closed, but the air around her was blistering, like the air above a flame. The crucifix nailed to the wood above her had warped overnight and downward, as if bowing or recoiling. Forgive me, Father, Clara said, for I have not sinned, but something in me has. Her voice was raw, not hoarse but scraped, like something had spoken through her. Wearing her vocal cords then, the priest Father Emilio, a man who had served 32 years in Silent Street, to respond, but the screen between them turned black, as if shadow itself had seeped between the gaps. What lives in you, child? He whispered. Clara tilted her head. He said, I am the last gate, and that I am already open. A gust of wind exploded inside the confessional. Pages from the priest's Bible scattered. The statue of Mary cracked at the neck, and from behind the wooden screen, a second voice answered. She came in white, but we baptized her in ash. Father Emilio stood up to fast and stumbled out. When the other clergy came, they found Clara still sitting, smiling faintly, lips moving in a prayer none of them recognized. Latin twisted backward, names not meant for earth. One priest, young and curious, leaned closer. That's when it happened. The crucifix above her began to drip. Not water, not blood, wax. No, something darker, thicker, a black resin that hissed when it touched the ground. Smoke rose, and the figure of Christ melted, his mouth lanced, as if trying to scream. And Clara, she looked up at the ceiling and said, He wants his name spoken again. Episode 3. The night the choir sang in reverse. At Sunday, the church was packed. Word had spread not of miracles, but of madness. People wanted to see the girl who melted the crucifix. Some came to pray, others to gawk, but none expected what happened when the choir began to sing. It was Ave Maria, a simple hymn, familiar, safe, until the second verse twisted. The sopranos' voices slowed, then reversed, as if the air had turned the melody inside out. Latin syllables collapsed into something ancient, guttural, and wrong. Children in the pews began to weep. One woman collapsed, clutching her ears. And Clara, she stood at the back, head bowed, lips unmoving, but every word came from her. Not her voice, his, the same one from the baptismal water. Louder now, proud. I Saturday frouncing beside my mother, her rosary rattling like bones in a box. The stained glass windows dimmed, as if sunlight no longer wanted to pass through them. Then came the scream. The choirmaster's mouth burst open, wide to wide, and he collapsed. His tongue was gone. In its place, a snake of ash coiled and slithered into the altar. Behind it, the organ played on by itself, and every voice in the choir turned, still singing backward. Eyes black, faces wet with something that wasn't sweat. Clara stepped into the center aisle. The hymn was never meant for heaven, she said, calmly. It was a key. The lights exploded. The crucifix fell from the ceiling, and in the shattered silence, a second bell rang, the bell no one had touched since the monastery buried it after the plague. People fled, screaming, crying, but I stayed, because something inside me knew this wasn't the end. It was only the next verse. Episode 4. The bell that rang for the dead. The bell that tolled that night and rung in over 100 years. Not since the black mass that cursed the monastery's east wing. It was buried beneath stone and silence, sealed with salt and scripture, and yet he ran. No rope, no wind, just sound. Thick, heavy, like it was dragging itself out of a grave. The villagers said it was an echo, a trick of the mountains, but those of us in the church, we knew better. Clara had vanished again. The bishop ordered the church locked, but locks meant nothing now. That night, the great door burst open on its own. I saw it with my own eyes. No wind, no force, just obedience, as if something had been summoned. Inside, the pews were soaked with dew, though it hadn't rained. The air smelled of copper and lilies left alone on a grave. At the center of the altar, something had been carved into the stone, a name, but no one could read it because it kept changing. Acolytes were sent to cleanse the chapel. None of them returned. The fifth, one Brother Ram ID'd, but not as he left. His robe was gone. His skin was marked in black circles, like burned fingerprints, and he repeated only one phrase: "The dead do not forgive the living." I approached the altar. I don't know why. Maybe to feel it, maybe to understand what Clara had become. That's when I heard the bell again, only this time it rang from beneath the floor 7 times, and each toe made the stone under my feet pulse, like a heartbeat, like breath, and the whisper returned it through ears, but through blood. One by one, the buried awaken, and she is the bride of their return. I turned. Clara stood behind me, pale, still, a candle in her hand, unlit but glowing. Her eyes had no pupils, just white, just silence. She reached out, not to hurt me, but to annoy me. She touched my forehead, and I saw them, the dead, lined in rows beneath the church, mouths sewn shut with rosary threads. Eyes still moving, waiting, listening, their skin pressed against the underside of the floor like parchment. Clara leaned in and whispered into my ear. The bell calls them to sing next. And far beneath, I heard his murmur of a choir with no tongues. Episode 5. The Bible that bled when opened. They told us not to touch it. The old Bible locked inside. The reliquary chest was wrapped in 3 chains, each blessed during a different century. One forged during the plague, one soaked in the blood of martyrs, one made from melted chalices stolen back from heretics. It had been hidden beneath the cathedral floor, but after the bell rang for the dead, the chains broke. Not except melted. Father Aldous, the eldest among us, said it was a sign of revelation, that heaven had chosen to unveil something. But when he opened the Bible, the pages pulsed beneath his fingers and bled. Thick, black blood seeped from the spine. Not ink, not illusion. Blood that smelled of sulfur and something rotting. The scripture within had changed. Words once divine were now twisted. Verses were written in mirror Latin, trembling on the page as if still being rewritten by invisible hands. And at the center, Clara's name, over and over, burned into the margins, circled in symbols older than scripture. One symbol kept repeating, the ring of eyes around a screaming mouth. Father Aldous collapsed before he could turn another page. His skin blistered, his tongue turned to ash mid-prayer. The others fled. I did not, because the Bible spoke to me, not in sound but memory. Visions filled my skull. of Clara standing inside a circle of fire, her body lifted off the ground, her hair burning without smoke, her mouth white singeing something that bent time backward, and behind her, hands, down scenes of them, clawing through the chapel stone, reaching not for her, but through her, using her. Clara wasn't possessed. She was channeling. The Bible flipped its own pages until it reached a final passage, a blank page except for one line. She is the voice before the gate, and the gate remembers hell. And then the Bible burst into flame, but it didn't burn. The flame hovered, cold, boo, whispering, and inside it, I saw Clara again, this time standing before a door of bone, knocking. With each knock, the flame hissed a word. Soon, Episode 6, the door that should never open. There is a door behind the altar. It was sealed before the cathedral was ever built, before this land even had a name, covered in prayers older than scripture. Its hinges were carved from petrified bone. Its handle a twisted ring of iron grown from the earth itself. No key, no seams, only one instruction, etched into the wall beside it. Speak not, knock not, look not. But Clara was already knocking. I watched her in the vision, her hand pressed to the cursed ring, and I felt it through the Bible's flame. Every knock echoed not in sound, but in memory. I saw the villagers burying something here long ago. Not a person, not a beast, something without a name, and I saw them fail. Now, that door moaned at night. You could hear it in the walls of the cathedral, a slow groan, like stone grinding against teeth. The air around it vibrated with pressure that made your ears bleed if you stood too close. Father Emilio ordered it barricaded. Candles, crosses, salt. The Book of Lamentations was read aloud every hour. None of it mattered, because the door had already opened. From the inside, on the seventh night, the altar cracked. Beneath it, something pulsed like a heart buried in stone. A red light began to leak from the seams of the door, and with it came the sound of chains dragging. We gathered in fear. The bishop held the only relic we thought might protect us, a shard of the original baptismal basin, now darkened with Clara's touch. He stepped forward. He whispered her name. The door stopped, just for a second. Then it whispered back, "She no longer belongs to you." And it opened an inch, not wide, just enough for something to slip out. A hand, not bone, not flesh, something between. Clawed fingers wrapped in rosary beads turned black. The air turned cold and thick with a scent of incense burned along. The bishop screamed. The shard in his hand cracked, and Clara's voice rose in it from her lips. But from beneath the altar, let them come, one by one, through me. Episode 7, the hand that baptized the dead. It moved like it remembered the world. The hand still half hidden in the shadow of the door slid across the altar with intent. Not wild, not erratic, like a priest blessing a relic, like it knew the rituals, but had unlearned the mercy. It reached for the broken shard of the baptismal basin, and where its blackened fingers touched, the relic hissed, cracked, and dissolved into dust. The bishop wept, not from fear, but recognition. That hand, it belonged to St. Thales. He whispered. He was buried centuries ago, martyred in silence, but the hand was not his anymore. Clara emerged then, barefoot, robed in with linen that clung like a second skin. Her skin glowed faintly, like moonlight passed through stained glass. She held a bowl in her hands made not of wood, nor gold, but bone. The water inside shimmered red. The bishop fell to his knees. "No," he muttered, "you must not." But it was already too late. Clara dipped the blackened hand into the crimson basin, and the church groaned like a living thing. The statues wept salt. The candles burned upside down, and the dead began to stir beneath the floor. Their voices a low chant rose like smoke. She has made the water ready. One by one, figures began to emerge from the cracks in the cathedral tiles. Pale, eyeless, with crosses seared into their palms, they crawled toward Clara not in hatred, but in devotion. She touched each one with the hand, and with every touch, they changed it, healed, not restored, but remembered. They stood, they spoke prayers in languages no longer taught, and their breath smelled of earth and incense and forgotten vows. Father Emilio screamed, "Stop, you're baptizing the damned." Clara looked at him calmly, lovingly. "No," she said, "I'm restoring the choir." The final note came from the walls themselves, a sound that couldn't be sunkenly felt, a vibration in the soul, a hymn written by those cast out of heaven for loving it too much. And at its center stood Clara, child of ash, voice of flame offering rebirth not to the living, but to the forgotten. Episode 8, the choir of the damned sang her name. It began with a hum, low, ancient, like wind blowing through skulls left alone in forgotten fields. The sound came from the mouths of the baptized, dead those Clara had awakened. Each of them stood with hands lifted, palms open, waiting, and then they sang. No melody known to men, no harmony forged by angels. This was a sound of rupture, choir of those cast out, their tongues scorched by eternity, now made whole through Clara's touch. They sang her name, Clara. The walls quivered, the stained glass depictions of saints began to melt, not from heat, but shame. And above it all, the sound of the choir grew louder, until the bell tower shook and dropped its final bell to the earth with a crash that silenced every bird within miles. Clara stood in the center, eyes closed, arms outstretched. Her linen robes no longer clung, but they flowed as if caught in some invisible tide. She didn't sing, she listened, and as the choir sang her name, something shifted in the cathedral air like heaven, far above, had finally turned its gaze and found no sanctuary left. Then came the tearing, not of fabric, not of wood, but of reality. A line appeared across the altar floor, splitting it, leisured and cold-powered through the crack, and something rose, not a figure, but a shadow, tall and thin, crowned with silence. The dead did not run, they knelt. Even Father Emilio, trembling at the edge, could not look away. "What is that?" he whispered. Clara turned slowly to him, her face glowing with terrible serenity. "The choirmaster," she said. The shadow stepped forward and sang. One note, pure, final, and with it, every candle extinguished, every cross turned upside down. The very foundation of the church shifted as if recoiling from what it had once buried. And still, the choir sang Clara's name, over and over, because she was no longer just a girl. She was a vessel. Episode 9. The vessel who spoke in tongues that burned the sky. It happened at dawn. The sky above the cathedral on Serena began to ripple like water touched by wind. Then it cracked, a hairline fracture across the heavens, glowing with blood-colored light. Birds scattered, the clouds recoiled, and those who still clung to prayer found their words turning to ash in their mouths. Clara raised her face toward the wound in the sky. Her lips did not move, yet the air around her trembled with language. It wasn't speaking, it was unmaking. She was no longer the girl baptized in water. She had become the altar, the vessel. From her mouth poured syllables not meant for mortal tongues yet, searing sounds that peeled pain from sacred walls and shattered the bones of saints sealed in the crypt below. Every word she spoke carved itself into the air as flame. Father Emilio tried to cover his ears, but it didn't matter. The sound bypassed flesh. It struck the soul. One nun collapsed, eyes wide with tears of light. Another walked into the fire willingly. Smiling, the cathedral ceiling began to drip molten glass. The cross at the pinnacle burst into smoke, and the sky itself full light that scorched the steeples of every church in the valley. Clara opened her arms. Above her, the fracture widened. A circle of mouths and faces. Only mouths began to speak with her, echoing her tongues, joining her sermon of reversal. Reality bent. Time stuttered. One boy, just 12, began speaking backwards in his sleep and never woke again. Those still alive called it a judgment, a cleansing, a heresy, but Clara called it what it truly was, a translation. "I am the prayer," she whispered, and from above, the mounds answered, and we are the response. Then the sun went black. Episode 10. When the sun forgot to rise again. We waited for morning, but it never came. The sun had vanished, swallowed by a wound in the heavens that refused to close. What remained above us was not night, but a vast, bleeding silence. The sky held no stars, only the imprint of mouths that had once spoken Clara's name. Time twisted, the village clock spun backward, shadows moved without light, and the bells, those ancient bells that had once marked the hour of prayer, no rang at random, tolling for things no longer human. Clara stood at the center of the cathedral ruins, her feet above the broken altar, no longer touching the earth. Her body glowed faintly, like coal just before it dies or just before it sparks. People came from surrounding towns, crawling on their knees. Some brought offerings, rosaries melted into rings, ashes of their firstborns, tongues cut out and wrapped in cloth. They called her La Luz del Abismo, the light of the abyss, but she did not speak. She only listened, and the silence around her began to speak in her place. Buildings wept oil from their walls. The soil refused to accept burials. Rivers flowed backward toward their sources, as if the world itself was remembering a sin it had buried along. Then came the second voice, not Clara's, not human. It rose from the broken sky, a voice made of metal, weeping, and everything you've ever feared in your sleep. It spoke a single phrase that echoed across the land. The covenant is broken, and with it, Clara's eyes opened wide, not glowing, empty, two perfect voids, reflecting nothing but the end. Around her, the dead began to rise again at the baptized, not the faithful, but all of them, the forgotten, the condemned, the children who never cried, the mothers who were buried clutching prayers that were never answered. Clara descended slowly, her bare feet brushing the shattered stone. Her voice returned, but it came as a question. Who shall judge the silence? No one answered, because heaven was no longer watching, and hell had begun to listen. Episode 11. The prayer that dared to name God's mistake. They found the parchment beneath the altar, curled and trembling, as if it still remembered the hand that had written it. It was not made of paper. It pulsed like skin, faint and warm. The ink glowed faintly, not black but red like wine mixed with ash. And as Father Emilio unrolled it with gloved hands, he began to sob. The words were not in Latin, not in Hebrew, not in any language known to the clergy. And yet, every priest who read it understood it, because it spoke directly to the wound they carried, the quiet fear that maybe, just maybe, heaven had made a mistake. He created light. It began, but forgot where to put the shadow. They called it the sinful prayer. It named what had never been named. It spoke of the first reversal of moment before time when a voice, not God's, answered the void. It called that voice beautiful, and it wept for it. The parchment ended with a warning. When the Virgin speaks this aloud, not even angels will close their eyes. That night, Clara read it, not to the sky, not to the dead, but to the silence itself. She stood in the center of the graveyard where no body stayed buried. Around her, the wind stilled, the dead knelt, and even the stars chose few that flickered weakly through the broken firmament transient place. Clara's mouth moved, and the words spilled forth like fire poured over ice. The heavens cracked again, not broken, peeled, as if a veil was being torn from something no one had ever been meant to see. And through that tear, something stepped forward. It did not shine, it did not burn. It remembered the first betrayal, the forgotten child, the angel who asked the wrong question. And when it looked at Clara, it did not bow. It smiled and whispered back the final line of the prayer. You were not a mistake. You were the answer. Episode 12. The angel who took her hand. It did not have wings. The being that emerged from the split sky bore no halo, no trumpet, no robe of righteousness. Its presence was not accompanied by light, but by memories not its own, but borrowed from us. It walked barefoot across the graveyard. Every step awakened the ground, not in life, but in acknowledgement. Flowers that had never grown there bloomed and withered in the same breath. The statues of saints turned their heads away, and Clara did not flinch. She stepped forward, one breath, one silence, and reached out her hand. Their fingers met not in reverence, not in worship, but in recognition. The angel's skin was cold, soft, and humming with the weight of questions heaven had never wanted answered. In that moment, the wind returned a bit. It moved upward, into the sky, like the world was exhaling its last truth. The angel looked at Clara, its eyes infinite and unfinished. You are the proof, it said, that the echo can become the voice. Then it knelt, and Clara, she did not ascend. She descended, not into fire, not into punishment, but into understanding. The ground opened like breath held too long, and Clara stepped through, still holding the angel's hand. As the stars blinked one by one, and the churches turned to face east again for the first time in centuries, and those of us who remained, we did not speak of her again, because she had become the one thing no sermon could contain, a truth too holy to forgive,